Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at Real World. I'm Radheyan Simonpillai, the culture editor at Now Magazine, film critic at CTV's Your Morning, and pop culture columnist at CBC Radio. And I'm really excited to discuss cinematography and the power of visual storytelling with y'all when it comes to two films that are at the Real World Film Festival. That's 837 Rebirth and La Fortaleza. 837 Rebirth is the story of two men who are forever linked by one tragic event. La Fortaleza is the story of a Venezuelan man trying to sober up in the Amazon jungle as Venezuela undergoes political and social upheaval. And to discuss both of these films, let's bring in the filmmakers. So from 837 Rebirth, we have director Juanita Peters. Anyone from New Brunswick might remember Juanita from her time as a reporter and anchor of CBC News. She's also an actor, a playwright, the executive director of the Africville Museum, and of course, the filmmaker behind I Made a Vow, Hannah's Story, Africville Can't Stop Now, and 837 Rebirth. Come on in, Juanita.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Did I get all the details right? Did I mess anything up there? I didn't mess anything up, right? You'll tell me
No,
after.
you didn't mess anything up. You just showed how old I am.
No, not at all. Okay, so let's get to that. So we have a couple of people from La Fortaleza. First up is director Jorge Thielen Armand, the founding partner of the Venezuelan Canadian production company La Faena. Jorge is a 2021 Guggenheim Fellow. His first feature film, La Soledad, premiered at the Venice Film Festival. His follow-up, La Fortaleza, premiered at Rotterdam. His films have been shown at the London Institute of Contemporary Arts, the New York Museum of the Moving Image, and of course here at Real World. Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I should also say, so Juanita, you're joining us from Halifax, did you say?
It's correct. Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Okay, and Jorge is all the way from Collingwood, right? So joining Jorge from La Fortaleza, we also have the cinematographer Rodrigo Michelangeli, another Canadian Venezuelan filmmaker who is an alumni of Montreal Docs, the Montreal Doc Festival's Talent Lab, the Hot Docs Accelerators Program, and the Venice Biennale College. And he served as cinematographer on both of Armand's films, La Soledad and La Fortaleza. Welcome, Rodrigo, from where are you? London, Ontario.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And he's also a musician, as you could tell from the drum kit in the background, right?
Indeed.
All right. So, okay, before we start talking about like visual styles, like the visual styles of the films, I mean, I do want to kind of work our way, like intro ourselves to these films, maybe like start with kind of the origin stories of where these stories came from. So, Juanita, I mean, you're telling a story of sort of shared trauma, of trauma that's passed along. Can you talk to me about where 837 Rebirth came from?
Yes. One of the producers, Hank White, the story is loosely the gem of it comes from something that happened in his childhood, and there was an event where a storekeeper was murdered by some young kids, and so that kind of starts the germ of the story that we tell. But the story that we tell is much more complicated than that, or is it? Who knows what those young guys' story was? And so this is what we do. We start with two characters who you kind of think in the beginning, and throughout the film, their real life story and what made us come to this particular moment in time is unraveled, throughout the film. So yeah, but yeah. Hank White, that was his great little gem.
Perfect. And so Jorge, Rodrigo, I mean, I feel like you have a very complicated origin story with this one. La Fortaleza. Am I saying it right? The title for La Fortaleza?
Yeah. That's perfect.
And that translates to fortitude?
Fortitude. Actually, okay, in Spanish, fortaleza means both fortitude and it can also mean fortress.
Okay. Yeah. So where did this story come from? I mean, this is a story of, actually, I'm gonna let you take it away. It's such an intimate story, right? It's
yeah.
Your dad stars in your movie, and he's playing a version of himself, right? So
yeah. So the La Fortaleza is inspired by my father's real life experiences living in the Amazon jungle in the 90s. He tried to build there a tourist camp that then didn't succeed because of the economic crisis, and he stayed there and was involved in a saga of episodes of drinking and around the illegal gold mines with the indigenous people from the region. And so we had the idea to ask ourselves, well, what would happen if my real father returned to that camp in contemporary Venezuela to try to rebuild it? So the movie kind of, the germ starts from there. So in a way that the movie is kind of inspired by this past, but also deals a lot with my real father's like present struggles with alcoholism and the situation in Venezuela. But it also imagines that future, that we like to call a documentary dream, because we go there with a real person to the real place, and he meets his real friends from 20 years ago. And so that's how the movie kind of comes together.
Yeah, I actually brought this little gem that we have here. This was the first slate that we used when we recorded the demo in the jungle in 2016. It's all broken because it went through the hardships of the jungle. That was in 2016. So it's been quite a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then I guess so like as our entry points into this conversation about visual storytelling, about using cinematography, I think we should start with the opening shots of your films, right? Like, how are you setting up these stories with your opening shots? Like, Juanita, let's start with you. I mean, your film it starts with the two close-up images of the two young men, in that sort of flashback sequence, but maybe not like, I think it's sort of an out of time and place sort of shot because it's not actually taken within the flashback scene, so to speak. It's taken from that incident, but it's framing them slightly differently. The back and forth shots of the two guys, and then we see young. Sorry, what was the character's name? The one that goes to prison. Jared, yeah. So we see young Jared in a prison cell through a window, and you come in closer. The frame seems to widen as he starts taking up drawing in his little book while he's in a prison cell. And there's, so yeah, like talk to me about like how that visual storytelling there is setting up your story.
Yeah. So we start the story with the moment their life changed, that very impactful moment that everything changed. And we often think in our lives of things before that. I think of, my life before my father passed away, after that. We all have little benchmarks. This was before we moved from this house. This was after, especially as children, we have very significant things in our lives, and we mark everything by that. And so, yes, the scene that you see the faces of the two individuals at that moment. And then we go into Jared, who is the shooter, into the prison cell, right? And, what is the only thing that he can find that is comforting to him, or the only thing that he knows and can associate with in that prison cell. And we start with that artwork because that becomes the piece that follows him throughout his life, it becomes his comfort thing for forever, and it grows. So yeah, we wanted to introduce that as very early as part of his safety place, his comfort zone, and get into because the art is a huge part of telling the story of his trajectory.
Right. Yeah. And then, okay, so Jorge and Rodrigo, I mean, your film opens with it's a very interesting shot with the river stream. You follow this river and it takes us to a wreck. So talk about opening the film that way.
What I can say is that we always knew that the movie started with this wreck, but we didn't necessarily know that there was going to be a river and that the camera was going to move in that way. The way we work is that, the script is kind of a starting point, and we make a lot of decisions on the fly, like based on what's around us. So originally that used to be a shot of the sky and would come down to the car. But when we found that location of the ravine where the car falls down and there was this river, just the way that the location was lending itself and how that stream of water kind of brought us to him, it just felt right. So that's how we decided to open the film.
Yeah, and analyzing it now, it kind of says something about humankind in nature and wrecking it, you know, with the illegal gold mines later on in the film. You might think you're going to see a film of the jungle, but we're still in the city, really. So it kind of yeah, it does that too, and it's pretty cool. It's also a location I found that I used to go when I was a kid in Caracas. I used to go bike there with my parents, and that river was always the cool part, because you'd go down on a bicycle and then you can bike on a river because it's a little stream, right? So I don't know, it brings a lot of memories, and I was terrified to shoot that because the movement was pretty specific. We did it several times in the light, and the sun was coming up, and we were supposed to shoot a lot earlier. So I remember that being the first shot of the movie. You know, Jorge wanted to shoot chronologically, so it was a big challenge.
Well, it's fascinating because it's like, I mean, apparently you didn't plan this river shot, or you say that you wanted to shoot from the sky, but it's like, but going down the river is a real theme in this movie. I mean, it's a recurring shot, right? So it definitely fits, and it's also seems like, you know, you're giving into nature. Your film is giving into the nature or the habitat of it, right? And I mean, yeah. So let's explore kind of the overall visual style then of both of your films. And Juanita, we'll start again with you. I mean, what was the guiding methodology over like kind of your overall visual design for the film?
For me, you know, it was all about darkness and light, you know, mentally and physically, darkness and light, moving into the things that we fear, moving into the things that we can change, you know, how your life progresses or not, you know. So that's where we started. When I first started talking with my cinematographer, it was all about that. It was about darkness and light and movement. There are times when I really need to see this character, you know, so we have, three actually main characters, but these two, we need to see this one, you know, starting low and this one being high. And this is what happens, you know, throughout the film. And so even my camera angles were important into how we saw people at different positions in the film. And Rodrigo, you just talked about shooting chronologically, and this was not. It was, there were times when we were shooting the actual, not the ending, but pretty close to the deterioration of the Sergei character before he's, been really happy. So it's like, you also have to think about, how we're shooting him, and is we need him looking, really, those shots need to have a different type of vibration to them, because he's losing his brain at this section. And instead of using, special effects or anything like that, for me, it was really about the vibration. Like if I walk into a room and I'm really nervous, you might most likely know that, because of the way that I behave. But if I'm really comfortable, I'm welcoming and open. And, so it was a combination of how we shoot them in terms of the movement of the camera, and what's around them in terms of lighting. Lighting was very, very important as well.
So I'm just gonna I'm gonna stick with you for a bit, Juanita, and then we'll be like, so we'll talk about the visual design of one film and then go back to La Fortaleza after. So, in terms of when you're talking about like the angles and everything that you shoot them, I mean, so did you have a distinct kind of method of shooting for each character? Like in terms of those, was each character's was the visual design around each character distinguished in some way?
Yes. So for the earlier positions of Sergei, I needed him to look in charge. I needed him to look like king, and so you'll notice in the beginning, especially, if you think of the point of view of your children, you are always, that bigger than life person, and so in those shots that should be in the earlier part of the film, he looks, in control. We're looking up at him, where, he's, and then as he degrades, or his life starts to deteriorate, he is more erratic, and darker, and lower on the visual piece. Even where you see his wife coming in to check on him as he's starting to deteriorate. He's always lower, like down. And for Jarrett, it's the exact opposite. We start seeing him getting bigger and bigger and bigger in life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and okay, so like you're also playing with tints, or the lights that are inside the frame, right? Like, I mean, it's like Bertolucci-esque in the way you were used, like the red light, the green light, the yellow light, right? Like, so what is the coding there? Is there a coding there?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's the danger. It's the cold, which puts you on the outside. That cold feeling that is lonely. It's detaching. And then the reds are the more danger. The greens are almost progressive, like things that grow, when he's trying to figure out. So the film is really about, a mathematician who is trying to figure out how he could have changed the timeline on the murder of his father. So he works everything out through numbers, and here's one thing that he can't change. And so when he's trying to build that mathematical piece, the answer, it's there's a lot of greens, it's like growth, I'm getting closer until the door shuts on him.
Right. Okay. And I mean, at certain points, I thought the green was like him suffocating, right? Because it feels like there's, especially in tight spaces, the green comes in and stuff like that. But
I mean, it's at that point he's still growing in his mind. He's still trying to, he's still you see he gets closer and closer, but he can never get to it, right?
Yeah. So then, and then like, okay, like, and of course, like, I mean, maybe I should catch people up. Like, that's like, this is a character who is, suffering from his father's death, and he's trying to grow from that. And then the other character is guilty of murdering the father under certain circumstances. And I mean, but is there a point where you're trying to connect them visually, like bridge them, when as the movie's progressing, and you're kind of like, these characters are, one character seething over here, the other character's trying to rebuild his life. Is there a point, and you mentioned how you have them, you're approaching them very distinctly, but is there a certain point where as the movie progresses that you're trying to bridge them visually?
And they are bridged because they are both in their own they are both prison. Suffering. Yeah, they're both in their own mental prison, right? So they're both suffering. Eventually one feels that he's moving past it, with growing his life. But that's the importance of, like he says, do you ever think that something follows you no matter what you do? And this is the shooter, no matter what you do, no matter how much good you do in the world, you feel like it still follows you. And for Sergei, the little boy who grows up to be the mathematician, no matter what happens, there are indications all through his life, even with his conversations with his wife, that he has been haunted by this his whole life. And it just escalates, at the time of Jarrett getting out of prison. But they are both linked in that mind prison. They are both linked by that incident. And actually, the further you get into the movie, you realize that it's a triangle, actually. It's not two people. It's actually a triangle.
Okay, interesting. Wait, who's should I be guessing at who the third? We won't give spoilers or whatnot here, but so then, like, and then I mean, like, look, visual style with this movie. There's of course. By the way, who's your cinematographer? I know I looked this up earlier, but
Jeff Wheaton.
Shout him out. Jeff Wheaton. No, that's right.
Jeff Wheaton. Yeah, he's actually filming Moonshine right now, so he was unavailable today.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like, but like, okay, so there's the visual style, the camera work, the tints and all that. But then, I mean, this is a movie that is also about painting, and it's about math formulas. I mean, like part of the visual style is honing in on these actual paintings and honing in on the whiteboard where Sergei's math formulas are becoming their own piece of art and an expression of these people's interiority. So talk about how do you incorporate, how do you make that part of the visual style, or like how do you emphasize
it? It's interesting because that is another part of the linking. They both work with their hands, in different ways. And they're both obsessed with these things, with their working, with their hands. And I have to tell you a little funny story, because when the script was originally written, I mean, everything is based on the math. And when the script was originally written, I was trying to figure out, what would that look like? What does that math look like? And, is it complicated? Is it, what does it actually look like? And we sent it to a few mathematicians and they said, well, the math doesn't even make sense. It's all wrong. And we said, oh my gosh. So we sent it to, I think, 4 retired university math professors, and they're like, oh, we can't do anything with this. So I contacted Dalhousie University's head of Senate and said, give me the best mathematician you have. And this guy actually was on set with us every day. Every day. And he would do the boards, and he'd have all the stuff ready, and he would teach the actors, here's the piece that you're going to erase, you're going to do over and over and over. And that piece of them actually doing the math was a design as well, very much like the paintings. And so while we were just as focused on how they're doing the math, we're just as focused as on to what he's actually painting, because as you probably know, a lot of the paintings are the work of Alan Syliboy, and so we had to have multiple copies created by the art department for reasons of which you viewers will see, but we need him actually working on these and creating little pieces in those some of them are very, very large paintings, just as the boards are. Some of those math boards are massive, and they actually, I'm very proud to say, make sense. And I've had a lot of comments from people smarter than I on how good the math is in this production. So, but it's all part of that. It's both pieces are growing. The math is growing. The summations that he's making is growing and bringing him closer to an answer. And the same with the paintings. The paintings are bringing the artist or Jared closer to a discovery.
Well, then, I mean, when you're shooting the paintings and you're shooting the math formulas and stuff, is there something, I mean, and they're both building towards some kind of self-realization in some ways, right? Like, is there like, was there something like where you're fragmenting the shots until you come to the coherent whole, so to speak?
Not really. For me, it was really about Sergei, who's very confident, in his profession. He's very confident in knowing that he knows what he's doing, and he's going there. And then here is Jared, who's taking these very light, nervous steps into this new, more professional, we'll say, arena, right? And then things get switched around, as to who's on top and who's on bottom.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I mean, when we talk about the bridge or like talking about how they kind of invert positions, so to speak, because what Jared's drawing in the opening is what Sergei's drawing at the end, so to speak, at a certain point, right? The right. So like, there's that.
Yeah. It's like going nowhere. You're just going around and around and around and around, right? And really, those movements are about taking everything else out of your brain, right? So when Jared is doing it in the prison, when we see him early, it's like, I just want to drive out everything else in my brain. This is what, and when Sergei is doing it later in life, it's exactly the same. He's really on a spiral going downhill. And this is just nothing is working. So we just go round and round and round in circle. So they're both doing the same thing. And both because they want to drown out their environment at the time. Only it's 20 some years apart.
Well, like, I mean, so here's I mean, like, one thing, like, I'm thinking of the memories, when the memories rush in, right? There's moments where, like, you know, so there's grain. Actually, both of your films are sort of the way they deal with memory. There's a linkage there, because like when in Rebirth, there's grain. The image, I mean, it looks like it's shot on film, and sometimes it feels like there's static coming through. You know, like a certain sense of static. I mean, you mentioned vibration at a certain point, but yeah, like honing in on just kind of like the kind of static image. When we see memories come through in La Fortaleza, it's similar. There's like a certain static, there's scratches, film grain, like the scratches on the film reels and stuff like that. So Juanita, let's start with you. Like, I mean, what was the mindset there in terms of the way you depict memory?
Yeah, so memory is interesting. If you had asked me 8 years ago, when I saw the movie Car Wash, I would have swore I saw it at the Downs View Theater in Toronto as a kid with my grandfather. And my memory is that. And then just 2 years ago, it came up in a conversation, and I looked up the date of when that movie Car Wash came out. And it wasn't possible that I saw it in Toronto, because I was living in Nova Scotia at that time. We never went back to live in Toronto. But because I was used to going to the theater with my grandfather in Toronto, I just assumed, and my memory was that. And I've done a lot of work with people who have had traumatic incidents happen to them. And the memory isn't always 100% intact. So we remember specific things that are probably true. And then there may be other things that we've just kind of filled in along the way until we learn otherwise, or until we, listen, I would have given people my last dollar 8 years ago. If someone had challenged me and said, you know, you didn't see that in Toronto, I would have said, here's, you know, right? I know I did. And I would have been wrong.
Right. Interesting.
So memory is tricky.
Yeah. And so like, okay, so let's ask Jorge and Rodrigo, the way you depict memory when we talk about static and scratches. Like, I mean, the reason I'm hanging on this static thing, because I feel like there's something both of you are presenting memory as some kind of static thing. I mean, I feel like you're saying something about like how memory stays unchanged but wants to change or something. But go ahead, you guys talk to me. Tell me what's in your minds there.
Well, in La Fortaleza, there's, I guess, I mean, the film for sure it's a lot about memory. But the photos that you see there are real photos of me and my father from the past, and that footage that I think the one you're referring to with the scratches, that's an actual 8mm film that I found when we were making my previous film, La Soledad, from this family archive. So I think it's from the 1960s, of a trip that my grandfather took to the region where we shot the film. So we put that there. And then that's the state of the material, no? It was all scratched like that.
Yeah.
And it just, that's the way it was. And something really interesting happened, you know, with the music in that segment, that everything kind of lined up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I guess I'm the one scene I'm thinking of. I mean, there's that scene with the actual 8mm film, and you focus in. But there's another scene where he's going down the river, and this memory sort of just comes in, and there's you know, like kind of interference in a way, in the way it arrives.
I think he's referring to the shot of the river where you see the reflections of the leaves, and they go so fast that the image kind of gets kind of crazy.
Okay.
And with the intense music. Yeah,
there was no like lines or scratches or anything added to the footage itself, but that is a visual effect that happens in real life when you are speeding in that river. That those rivers are almost black in color, no? They're very deep, so they reflect at a certain time of day. They reflect the leaves that are on top of it, and it creates this really interesting kind of kaleidoscopic visual effect in a way.
Yeah, like kinetic, kind of so fast in your eyes, right?
All right, but so don't take any credit for the thing I'm trying to give you credit for. Just blame nature.
It's just nature.
But Rad, I'm glad that you did focus on that, because the other thing is, I don't know about Jorge's, but for mine, it's about trauma memory as well, which could be different. And in 2012, I had the pleasure of sitting down with 3 freedom riders. We were in Texas, and this particular individual's brother was a freedom rider, and he was actually burned on the bus, and he had no memory of it until he hit his 70s. He was a teenager at the time. And so this conference that I was at was all about the effects of pain and trauma in memory, and that you can actually, people will unintentionally shut down a memory that is severe. They will shut it down because it's too hard to know. I had never heard that before in my life, that that was even a possibility. You may have heard people say that you don't actually remember the feeling of pain, but you will remember the incident of pain. But apparently, this particular individual was unintentionally able to actually forget the physical pain of being burnt in this, when they set the bus on fire. And he was in hospital for almost 2.5 years.
That's way to take this in a like, that's so hard to grapple with
And
right
so
now,
just
right?
that traumatic memory,
Yeah.
apparently there is a way to
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, so then, like, I mean, like, look, I wanna like that's, I think, something that we can grapple with on both of these films. And I mean, like, so I want to get like Rodrigo and Jorge, like, I mean, let's talk about kind of the overall visual design of your narrative then, right? Like, we are talking about a going down the river narrative. What was your kind of intention there? And I know you're playing with nature, so it's so many variables involved here, but how does this work?
Well, I remember the first conversations that we had were about how to evolve from the first film that we did before, from La Soledad, with the equipment available in Venezuela too. So much of the identity of a film are the lenses that you choose. And down there, for some reason, there are several cases of these weird lenses called B-speeds, which have this triangular iris. It's very technical, but what it does is that the bokeh, so the out of focus highlights in the background, are triangular. They're not round or in the shapes of a normal iris. So we kept that from La Soledad, but then we decided on the aspect ratio to go a little bit more fiction, and we decided to go, instead of this 185, which is more documentary, to something like 2:1, which is a bit more widescreen, let's say. And so we came to all these conclusions because we wanted to evolve a bit from the hybrid label that we had in La Soledad to something more straight on fiction, even though it was based on Jorge's dad's real experiences. And then Jorge kept saying that he wanted the film to feel rough and like sandpaper. So one of the things we did is that we shot the film in high ISO, even though we were outside. So we had to really filter a lot of light. But that ended up maybe confusing the camera a bit and giving us a bit of noise, or that we later on translated into grain. And yeah, sometimes you get this kind of impressionistic painting kind of moments in nature that we really loved, and I think it served the character's journey a lot. And we changed lenses at the end, not because we wanted to, but because we drowned in a river with the equipment, and we we killed the lenses. Yeah, that happened. I was on that boat, and it was very frightening, but good thing, good publicity here for Pelican cases, because they saved our lives. They float, so we
Wait, Pelican, sorry, what does that mean?
Pelican cases, or just cases where the camera and the lenses.
Oh, right.
They're like
So
these
they
big
float.
plastic cases where you put the equipment that are
Yeah,
super
yeah.
safe.
And they saved the cameras, or they did not?
Yeah, well, they saved the camera, but the lenses weren't on one of those, so the lenses died. But
Right.
and then we had to repair it. But we chose to use better lenses. Let's say for the end of the movie, where well, you're gonna assess for yourself as a public, but the character evolves. So we used size lenses, clear and pristine ones. So there is a shift there in the visual style. With Jorge, go ahead.
Wait,
Yeah.
what happened? Can you just like what, did your boat crash? What happened here? Like it's like what, like
Oh, basically it was the night, and we were leaving one of the locations at night, and we usually go on these curiaras, which are indigenous boats, and we put too much equipment on it, and it really collapsed, and in a second we were already we were 12 people on the boat, and we were all floating with the equipment, and we had to stop for a day. Yeah, at night. It was a
Yeah.
crazy experience.
I think there's something else to be said about the visual style of the film, is that a lot of the decisions that we made visually are in service of making a film with the non-professional actors. So of course we wanted the camera work to in some way reflect the character, and that's where all the handheld work and the kind of improvised looking movements really close to the character communicate that kind of sense of anxiety, or that anything could happen in any moment, that you don't know where you're going to be looking. So so we worked mainly handheld, because I don't like to give marks or like very precise directions to these non-professional actors that are in front of the cameras, and rather just kind of define a space and let them go. And that really kind of gave the identity that the film has to them when it comes to movement. And the same with lighting. We worked mainly with natural light, and me and Rodrigo, we planned very well, like what time of day we were going to shoot in each particular location, of course trying to keep it chronological, so that the sun would be hitting through or coming through the leaves in that particular time, no? And whenever there were lights, we were using a lot this set of mirrors, or also white bounces to work with the natural light, because you know there's nowhere to plug in lights in the middle of the jungle. Sometimes we had generators with gas, but anytime there was artificial lighting, they were kept always outside of the location, so coming through the windows, so as to create space that doesn't feel with interference of pipes and lights and sandbags and things that an actor probably can ignore because they're trained with that. But someone like my father or the other people in the film, we always felt that it could really help the naturalism in the performances, and this is something that we started doing with the previous film, and it kind of honed during this new movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? The visual style of your movie is almost like you guys are trying to capture chaos in some ways, right? Like, I mean, you're working with nature, I mean, you have a whole documentary made by your partner, I believe, about the shooting of this movie, right? What is it called? El Father Plays Himself, right?
Yeah.
Is the name of the documentary about this movie. So it's like almost like and I mean, in terms of the chaos, I mean, I believe the chaos in terms of you having to be flexible and on your toes, it's you capturing nature, it's you capturing your father, who I guess was an unknown quotient at the time, but also even scenes like when you're out in the middle of Caracas and shooting him with a bloodied shirt in the middle of a crowd. Like, how do you manage situations like that?
Well, that crowd was real. That was a real protest, and we heard it was happening, and that was the first day we were traveling back from the car crash location at the beginning, and we heard of this protest, and we just kind of made that call on the spot. We were like, let's go to the protest, and there was a lot of anxiety in the van because certain people in the crew were saying, no, it's dangerous, and and me and other people were saying, no, nothing is gonna happen, let's go. And we went there, and we just said to my dad, okay, walk down the street from the avenue and we'll follow you with the camera. And everyone in the protest was looking at him like maybe he got hurt by some cops or something happened. And they were very shocked. And all of that, it fit, because those people in the protest who didn't see the camera and only saw my dad's bloody face and bloody shirt, they weren't acting, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but yeah. So, is there any other major challenges in terms of capturing that you wanted to talk about?
What can I say? You know, shooting in the Amazon jungle is a crazy challenge, and it's like, for example, the scenes that we did in the gold mines. We had planned all of that, but as soon as you get there, you can't whip out a piece of paper when someone has a hose and there's 30 guys like smashing the ground, and my dad and people screaming and the engine running there. And it's just like, you just shoot it. You just shoot it, and we had to actually shoot that twice because it was so difficult, like to how do you change a battery when you're like in the middle of mud and there's a hose. It was really kind of crazy experience.
I was thinking of the wasp nest too. I mean, you're shooting a scene where, I mean, is he like poking at a wasp nest or something? And I can imagine wanting to run from that. But I mean, we're talking about your visual style in this movie, but your visual style is, a lot of it is you capturing moments on the fly, you being ready for nature and stuff. But then what about the use of metaphors to tell your story, right? Like that's part of the visual style here. I mean, you got him barfing up a bat in one scene, right? You got him, you got the poison waters. Like, like how does that, in terms of like telling your story, how are you using the metaphors here?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I love the most about cinema, is that's something that only poetry can do, no? That you superimpose certain things and you say something, and that something doesn't always mean the same for every person, so our film is loaded with things that we put in there, knowing that we are saying something, not necessarily it has to be that. When you see a guy throw up a bat, I think it's open to a lot of interpretations, and also, with the movie, there's so much kind of that openness, and the movie doesn't move like a normal movie. No, it's very elliptical, and it sometimes very abrupt, if you will. And the things that people say that draw meaning from are just wild.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, but in terms of like we're talking about visual storytelling, using metaphors and all that stuff, but also, what about references? What about visual references to the movies of the past? That's part of the, like, I mean, like at certain points, like, I'm watching your movie and I'm like, images of going down the river, and I'm thinking Apocalypse Now, I'm thinking Aguirre, like, like I'm thinking of these movies. Like, I mean, is your visual design in some ways channeling some of those older films, and to what extent, if so?
Well, I think the throughout the process, like we watch a lot of movies, and those things, they stay with you, like whether you want it or not. I guess one reference for me always was the Louisiana the Other Side from Roberto Minervini, and yeah, I couldn't think of something like this is a reference. We had a reference, for example, for the quality of the color and the quality of the texture of the image, and that is at Eternity's Gate by with the Van Gogh movie. Mm-hmm. And we actually worked with the same colorist of that film, and that was something that we wanted, those intense colors, we wanted that texture, we wanted the film to almost feel like you could touch it.
There's one shot, by the way, like what you're describing there's one shot of the young woman carrying the baskets while she's listening in headphones and stuff, and that was probably my favorite image in the movie, just for the beauty of it, right? It just took my breath away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it was incredible. But I mean, like, and look, Juanita, let's bring you into this kind of conversation about using metaphors, channeling references. When you bring that into your visual design, I mean, did you think of that? Was that, like, I mean, especially with this painting of the man holding lightning, freezing.
Oh, of course. Lightning,
like
the story of Glooskap And the purpose of Glooskap is, through the entire film, for even though Sergei doesn't know anything about Glooskap, the young the mathematician, everything he's doing would have served him better had he, just not done anything, right? Which is the purpose of that. It's throughout in everything, in movement, how we move, when we move, and should we, move at certain times. And that is actually, in the third character, I don't want to spoil it either, but in the third character, which I told you, it isn't actually a triangle here. There's a whole piece there, should he have, if all three people had not moved at a certain point in their life, had they not done one thing or done one thing, their lives would have been completely different. And so that is, part of the message in Glooskap.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one other thing I want to talk about with, in terms of especially La Fortaleza, but also, if there's a connection here with 837 Rebirth is, La Fortaleza, you mentioned it, like the story is your father going into this jungle and he's among indigenous people, right? And I wonder, like, of course, like, you see, I wonder how that class, how that privilege plays into your story, because he goes into the jungle. It's almost like there's almost a story of him going savage in a way, right? And then he comes back out of it by the end of it, kind of clean shaven, starting over. He has his own rebirth, right? Are you touching on something there in terms of like the privilege of it all, the ability to be able to have that rebirth?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, he goes from being an outsider in the city, for his problems, with alcoholism, and he goes to the jungle to try to find something that he built there, where he has a past that he built with his indigenous friends, but he doesn't. That whole world actually can't even receive him, and where he can't be there, and all of that ends up pushing him out, and that rebirth, if you will. And for me, he dies there in the jungle, and he's sort of reborn outside in the city as a maybe new man. But also, he I'm spoiling and giving a lot of spoilers here, but he betrays his friend in a way.
Right.
And it's with his gold, that he like manages to escape. But he tries to help the girl, but only so much he can,
Yeah.
And that is the reality of Venezuela. There's so much history there, and so many classes living there together. Yeah.
Can I, by the way, like, we didn't even talk about the politics and what's going on in Venezuela, because one image where you have a bunch of people standing in line in front of a mural of Chavez and then they scatter. How did that, like, was that, like, that was orchestrated, I imagine, right? Like, but like, what are you getting across with that?
Well, so under the policies of Chavez and Maduro, all of these lines have appeared. You have to line up to get gas, you have to line up to get food, you have to line up to get a box of food that they give you. And so it's become a country of beggars, of people begging the government to give the last crumbs. And so that particular shot is there to be like, well, these lines will end, or these people won't be here when the protests come. There's all these sounds of protest and these people that run. And so the way that we did the shot is actually particularly funny. So all those people were extras that were hired to stand there, and we put the camera in a van very far away with a long lens with a glass that they couldn't see. And I just said, okay, let them stand there waiting, like tell them that we are getting prepared for the shot and everything. We put the camera, and we will let like half an hour go by, And we had these other extras that other extras didn't know that we're gonna come and say, there's a protest happening and all these things, go run, run. And we filmed it, kind of reality TV, like, and they didn't know, and they saw these people running and some of them started to leave, and they were, some were scared, no? And also all of that is what we captured. No, it was kind of a trick.
Yeah, but you're capturing a real anxiety in the country with even among your extras, actors and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how you feel when you're there.
Yeah. Rodrigo, were you gonna add something there? Or?
No, it just it was particularly funny because we were hiding, and it felt like a trick, like Jorge said. But at the end, we did it twice, I think. It ended up in the movie, and we got inspired from a photo, from a journalistic photo in that same mural. That it's a paradox, because you have this image of Chavez, who was promising everything to the people, and then you have them lining up in that same place just to get food. So you're talking about metaphors, and that one is a pretty straight one.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So Juanita, I'll give you the last word on this. Is there any of these ideas registering with you in terms of like kind of the privilege? I mean, one of your characters is Indigenous. We talk about shared trauma and passed on trauma, and who can kind of heal from this, and who gets the privilege of healing in a way. Does that register at all with your story?
Well, I think for both of my characters, they were both non-privileged, actually. And the only one who is the third person who I'm not going to talk about, who could have changed everything. And so they both, even though their lives, were different over that 20-year period, one's in prison and one's growing up with this, other trauma on the street or in their life, they're really, it's really about how different their lives were and yet the same, which is really the thread in every film every story I've ever told, how much we are all, we are different, in some ways, but we are more alike than we are different. And how we treat situations, what we do in situations will determine what our lives may look like.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. I'm glad we could end on that note. And that is all the time we have for today. So Juanita, Jorge, Rodrigo, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Thank you to the Real World Film Festival for hosting us, and for the audience who's tuning in. If you haven't already watched 837 Rebirth and La Fortaleza, they are on the Real World virtual platform. So enjoy them and enjoy the rest of your festival.